Sarah Hayes stepped off the transport shuttle onto the landing platform of Helios 7, the Galactic Combat Academy's primary training station. The metal beneath her boots hummed with energy as hundreds of cadets from dozens of species moved around her. She stood barely 5 feet tall, her frame slight compared to the towering aliens that dominated the crowd. A Kryn warrior bumped past her without acknowledgement. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall, its scaled hide thick as armor plating, muscles rippling beneath natural body plates that could deflect small arms' fire. Sarah stumbled but caught herself, adjusting the single bag on her shoulder. She had brought very little with her. Most cadets arrived with crates of equipment and personal items. Sarah carried only essentials and one carefully wrapped package she refused to let the transport handlers touch. The processing center buzzed with activity. Sarah joined the line for human cadets, though it was considerably shorter than the lines for Kryn, Vaxel, or Thrawn species. A bored-looking officer scanned her credentials without looking up. "Hey, Sarah. Earth origin. Standard combat track." The officer finally glanced at her, his eyes widening slightly. "You sure you want combat training? We have excellent support programs. Medical Corps is always looking for." "Combat track," Sarah said quietly but firmly. The officer shrugged and stamped her data pad. "Your funeral. Report to Barracks Delta 7. Orientation starts at 0600 tomorrow." Sarah found her assigned bunk in a room she shared with 5 other cadets. 2 were human like her, both male and considerably larger. The others were a Vaxel female whose crystalline skin reflected light in rainbow patterns, a Thrawn whose fur changed colors with his mood, and a Kryn female who took one look at Sarah and snorted. "They are sending children now," the Kryn said, her voice like gravel scraping metal. "You will not last 1 week, tiny human." Sarah said nothing. She placed her bag on her bunk and carefully unwrapped the package she had protected during the journey. Inside were 2 blades, each about 12 inches long, simple carbon steel with worn handles wrapped in cord. They were not fancy or decorated. They were tools passed down through her family for 3 generations. One of the human males, a tall guy named Paul, leaned over. "What are those for?" "We use plasma rifles and energy weapons here. Those things look ancient." "They are," Sarah replied, sliding them back into their sheaths. Orientation the next morning was brutal. Instructor Vekinar, a scarred Kryn veteran with one eye missing, stood before the assembled cadets in the main training hall. His voice boomed across the space without need for amplification. "You are here because your governments believe you can become warriors. Most of you are wrong. 60% of you will fail within the first month. Another 20% will wash out before graduation. The remaining 20% will become soldiers worthy of the Galactic Defense Coalition." He paced in front of them, his massive frame intimidating even to the larger species present. "We do not care about your species. We do not care about your homeworld politics. Here you prove yourself through combat ability alone." The first week confirmed Sarah's fears. Physical conditioning tests were designed for species with greater mass and strength. She struggled with obstacles built for 8-foot warriors. The running courses favored long legs. The climbing walls required reach she simply did not have. During weapons training, the standard plasma rifle felt unwieldy in her hands. The recoil, minimal for larger species, knocked her off balance. Energy shields designed for Kryn dimensions left gaps in her coverage. Every instructor who observed her performance shook their heads. By the end of week 2, Senior Instructor Thal 9 called her into his office. The Vaxel officer had crystalline features that made his expressions hard to read, but his tone was gentle. "Cadet Hayes, I have reviewed your performance metrics. You are struggling with every standard combat metric we have. Your marksmanship scores are below acceptable levels. Your physical tests place you in the bottom 5th percentile. Your shield work is inadequate for field deployment." Sarah stood at attention, saying nothing. "I am not trying to discourage you," Thal 9 continued. "But I would be failing in my duty if I did not point out that we have other tracks where you could excel. Medical Corps needs skilled personnel. Communications and intelligence divisions value human cognitive abilities. You could serve with honor in these roles." "I appreciate your concern, sir," Sarah said carefully. "But I believe I can contribute to combat operations. I request permission to demonstrate alternative techniques." Thal 9 tilted his head, light refracting through his features. "Alternative techniques?" "Close quarters combat, sir. With edged implements." The instructor was silent for a long moment. "Edged weapons? You mean blades?" "Cadet, we abandoned such primitive tools centuries ago. Plasma and energy weapons are standard for good reason." "I understand, sir. But close-quarters situations still occur. Boarding actions, station security, confined environments where energy weapons risk hull breaches. I believe I can show value in these scenarios. Thalnine brought up her file on his display. Your background shows martial training from Earth. Filipino systems, it says here. Kali and Silat traditions. He looked at her with something that might have been curiosity. These are blade-based fighting methods? Yes, sir. My family has trained in them for generations. The instructor made a notation on his pad. Very well, Cadet Hayes. I will grant you one opportunity. Tomorrow during free combat period you may demonstrate these techniques. If you show sufficient skill we will discuss modified training paths. If not, I strongly recommend you consider alternative service tracks. Agreed? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. That evening, Sarah sat on her bunk and carefully maintained her blades. The other cadets ignored her as usual, focused on their own equipment and studies. Paul glanced over once but said nothing. The Kryn female, whose name was Shara, laughed when she saw the blades. You think those toys will impress anyone tomorrow? The instructors will mock you, little human. You should accept what you are and move to easier work. Sarah tested the edge of one blade with her thumb, finding it satisfactory. Maybe, she said quietly. We will see tomorrow. She spent the next hour moving through forms in the empty corner of the barracks, her blades flowing in patterns passed down through her grandmother, her mother, and now to her. The movements were precise, economical, designed for efficiency rather than show. Each strike had purpose. Each angle created advantage. Tomorrow she would show them what those old ways could do. Tomorrow they would see that size and strength were not the only paths to victory. Tomorrow they would learn that sometimes the most dangerous weapon was the one they had forgotten to fear. Sarah sheathed her blades and lay down to sleep, her mind already visualizing the demonstration to come. The combat arena filled quickly the next afternoon. Word had spread that the small human cadet was going to demonstrate something unusual, and cadets loved watching failures. The arena was a circular space 50 feet across with padded floors and energy barriers to contain weapons fire. Normally it hosted plasma rifle drills or hand-to-hand combat between matched opponents. Sarah stood in the center, her two blades hanging loosely in her hands. She wore standard combat fatigues with light padding, nothing like the heavy armor most species preferred. Across from her stood 3 cadets, all volunteers who had agreed to participate in the demonstration. One was Thrawn, his fur rippling with confident orange tones. Another was a human male named Greg who outweighed Sarah by at least 80 pounds. The third was Vaxel, her crystalline form gleaming under the arena lights. Instructor Thalnine stood at the arena's edge with 2 other senior instructors. This is a demonstration of close-quarters combat techniques, he announced. Cadet Hayes has requested the opportunity to show alternative methods. The 3 opposing cadets are equipped with standard shock batons set to training mode. Cadet Hayes will use her chosen implements. The match ends when all opponents are disarmed or incapacitated, or when Cadet Hayes yields. Begin when ready. The 3 opponents spread out, forming a triangle around Sarah. This was standard pack tactics taught in Week 1. Surround the target, attack from multiple angles, overwhelm through numbers. Greg grinned, clearly thinking this would be easy. Sarah did not move. She stood perfectly still, blades held low and relaxed, watching all 3 opponents simultaneously. Her breathing was calm and even. The Thrawn moved first, charging forward with his shock baton raised high. It was an aggressive opening meant to force Sarah to react, to make her turn her back on the other 2. Instead, Sarah stepped forward into the charge inside the arc of his swing. Her left blade swept up, striking the Thrawn's weapon hand at the wrist. The shock baton clattered to the floor. Her right blade's pommel struck him in the solar plexus, and he stumbled backward, gasping. The whole exchange took less than 2 seconds. Greg attacked from her left while the Vaxel circled right. Sarah's footwork changed instantly. She moved in a triangle pattern, keeping all opponents in her field of vision, never allowing them to get fully behind her. Greg swung his baton in a horizontal arc. Sarah ducked under it, so low her hair nearly touched the mat, and swept her blade across his forward knee. Not cutting, just striking with the flat of the blade against the pressure point. Greg's leg buckled. The Vaxel thrust her baton forward like a spear. Sarah redirected it with her left blade, guiding it past her body, then stepped in close. Her right blade's edge pressed against the Vaxel's wrist, not cutting through the crystalline skin but applying pressure to the nerve cluster there. The Vaxel's hand opened reflexively and the baton dropped. The Thrawn had recovered and charged again, angry now. Sarah waited until he was almost on her, then sidestepped and used his momentum against him. Her blade tapped the back of his knee as he passed and he crashed to the mat. Before he could rise, Sarah's blade tip was at his throat, not touching but positioned with absolute precision. "Yield," the Thrawn gasped. Sarah stepped back immediately. Greg was trying to stand, favoring his struck leg. The Vaxel was flexing her hand, looking at it in confusion. The Thrawn slowly got to his feet, respect replacing anger in his eyes. Instructor Thal9 checked his timer. 87 seconds. All three opponents disarmed or disabled. The watching cadets erupted in noise. Some shouted in excitement, others in disbelief. Sarah stood in the center of the arena, blades already sheathed, her breathing only slightly elevated. Senior Instructor Vekenair pushed through the crowd. The old Kryn warrior's single eye fixed on Sarah with intense focus. "Again," he growled. 3 different opponents. Now. 3 more cadets entered the arena, these ones looking considerably more cautious. They had watched the first match. They thought they knew what to expect. Sarah simply nodded and drew her blades once more. This time the opponents tried different tactics. They moved together, coordinating their attacks, trying to strike simultaneously from different angles. Sarah became a blur of motion. Her blades never stopped moving, creating a defensive sphere around her body. Every attack was redirected, every opening exploited. She moved like water, flowing around strikes rather than blocking them directly. One opponent's baton was swept from his hand and sent spinning across the arena. Another found his weapon trapped between Sarah's crossed blades and twisted from his grip. The third tried to tackle her directly, and Sarah simply wasn't where she had been a moment before, her footwork carrying her to safety while her blade tapped his exposed ribs. 94 seconds this time. 3 more disarmed opponents. Vekenair's scarred face showed something that might have been approval. "Where did you learn this?" he demanded. "My grandmother taught my mother. My mother taught me," Sarah said simply. "These methods are very old on Earth. Different styles from different regions, but all built on the same principles. Economy of motion. Using the opponent's energy against them. Targeting vulnerabilities rather than relying on strength." Thal9 was studying his data pad with fascination. The combat AI cannot predict your movement patterns. It has cataloged 17,000 different fighting styles across 200 species, but nothing matches what you just demonstrated. Every time you moved, the predictive algorithms failed. More instructors had gathered now. A Vaxel tactical officer spoke up. "Demonstrate the disarming technique again." Slowly. Sarah complied, moving through the motion in careful detail. "It is called defanging the snake in some Earth systems. You do not fight the weapon. You attack the hand holding it. Strike the wrist, the fingers, the forearm. The weapon becomes useless." "But this requires getting very close," another instructor observed. "Within range where the opponent could strike you." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "But at close range, larger opponents lose many of their advantages. Long reach becomes a disadvantage. Size makes them slower to change direction. I am small, so I make myself smaller still, and I move where they cannot easily follow." Over the next hour, Sarah demonstrated more techniques. She showed how to fight multiple opponents in confined spaces. How to use environmental features to limit attack angles. How blade work could defeat armored opponents by targeting joints and gaps. How the same principles worked whether using 2 blades, 1 blade, or even empty hands. By the time the demonstration ended, over 100 cadets had gathered to watch. The looks of dismissal and mockery were gone, replaced by intense interest and respect. That evening, Sarah found her bunk surrounded by other cadets asking questions. How did she move so fast? Could she teach them? Would those techniques work against Kryn strength or Vaxel durability? Even Shara, the Kryn who had mocked her, approached with grudging respect. "I was wrong about you, small human," Shara admitted. "You are a warrior. A strange warrior with strange methods, but a warrior nonetheless." Within 3 days, Sarah was conducting informal training sessions during free periods. Within a week, she had a waiting list of cadets wanting to learn. The instructors watched with interest, taking notes, analyzing the techniques. Sarah Hayes, the fragile human they had all dismissed, had become the most talked about cadet at the Galactic Combat Academy. And this was only the beginning. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes moved through the corridor of the captured pirate vessel with practiced silence. Behind her, a squad of coalition Marines waited at the junction, their plasma rifles trained on the sealed bridge door ahead. The pirates had barricaded themselves inside with 2 hostages, both civilian engineers who had been working on the ship systems when the pirates seized it. This was the 4th boarding action Sarah had led this month. Pirate activity along the frontier had increased dramatically, and Coalition Command had discovered that Sarah's methods were perfect for ship-to-ship combat. Plasma weapons risked hull breaches in the thin-walled corridors of most vessels. Energy shields created feedback in confined spaces. But blades worked anywhere, in any environment, without collateral damage. "Lieutenant, we could cut through with torches," suggested Corporal Tim, one of the human Marines in her unit. "Give them no time to react." Sarah shook her head. "Too slow. They would hear it and kill the hostages. We go in fast and quiet." She placed a small charge on the door's locking mechanism. "When this blows, I go first. You follow 3 seconds after. Target acquisition only. Do not fire unless I signal." The charge detonated with a sharp crack. The door slid open and Sarah was through before the sound faded. The bridge was cramped, maybe 20 feet across, filled with control stations and displays. 4 pirates spun toward the entrance. 2 held energy pistols. 1 had a blade of his own. The 4th gripped a hostage, a Vaxel engineer, using her as a shield. Sarah's blades were already moving. She crossed the distance to the nearest pirate in 2 steps. Her left blade struck his gun hand at the wrist. The weapon clattered away. Her right blade's pommel struck his temple and he dropped. The second armed pirate fired, but Sarah was no longer where she had been. The energy bolt scorched the wall behind her original position. She rolled forward, coming up inside his firing line. Her blade sliced upward, not at him but at his weapon, striking the barrel and knocking his aim toward the ceiling. His next shot went wild. Sarah's follow-up strike hit the pressure point in his forearm, and his fingers opened involuntarily. The pirate with the blade rushed her, clearly thinking he could match her weapon to weapon. He was Thrawn, larger and stronger, his blade heavier than hers. He swung in wide, powerful arcs meant to overwhelm through brute force. Sarah didn't block. She redirected each strike with minimal contact, letting his blade slide past hers, using his momentum against him. On his 4th swing, she stepped inside his guard and struck his elbow joint with her pommel. His blade fell from nerveless fingers. The 4th pirate still held the hostage, his energy pistol pressed to the Vaxel's head. "Stop or I kill her," he screamed in broken standard language. Sarah froze, her blades held low and non-threatening. "You do not want to do that," she said calmly. "Drop weapons. Drop now or she dies." Sarah appeared to consider this. Her fingers loosened on her right blade as if preparing to drop it. The pirate's attention focused on that hand for just a moment. Sarah's left hand moved in a blur. The blade left her grip, spinning through the air, and struck the pirate's gun hand. Not the blade edge but the pommel, a precise impact that jarred the weapon from his grip without cutting the hostage. The Vaxel dropped and rolled away. Before the pirate could recover, Sarah was on him, her remaining blade at his throat. "Do not move," she advised. The Marines poured in, securing the prisoners. The entire engagement had lasted perhaps 15 seconds. The hostages were safe. All 4 pirates were alive but disarmed and disabled. Captain Walsh, Sarah's commanding officer, reviewed the helmet camera footage later that day. "Textbook execution, Lieutenant. Command is very pleased with your boarding action success rate. 97% hostage survival, minimal ship damage, high prisoner capture rate." He paused. "They want to send you to Telos, 9 station next month. Diplomatic conference. Protection detail." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I am a combat officer, sir. Bodyguard work seems outside my specialty. Normally I would agree. But intelligence suggests possible assassination attempts. The conference is bringing together Kryn and Vaxel faction leaders to negotiate peace in the Outer Reach conflicts. A lot of people want those talks to fail. Command thinks your close quarters expertise makes you ideal for interior security." Sarah nodded slowly. "Understood, sir. I will prepare." Telos 9 station was massive, a diplomatic hub that hosted negotiations between dozens of species and factions. The conference hall occupied the central ring, a grand space with high ceilings and elegant architecture designed to impress. Sarah hated it immediately. Too many entrances, too many sight lines, too many places for threats to emerge. She spent 3 days reviewing the station's layout, identifying choke points and escape routes, positioning her security team at critical junctions. The other security officers were standard diplomatic guards, trained in threat assessment and escort procedures. They looked at Sarah's blades with barely concealed amusement. "Lieutenant, we have sensor nets and energy shields," one Kryn guard explained patiently. "No weapon can get through our screening. You really don't need those antiques." "Humor me," Sarah replied. The conference began smoothly. Faction leaders from both sides sat at a long table, their advisors and staff arranged behind them. Sarah stood against the back wall, watching everyone, her hands resting casually near her blade hilts. Hours passed. Negotiations proceeded. Nothing seemed wrong. Then Sarah noticed one of the serving staff moving oddly. The Vaxel carrying refreshments to the table was walking with slight stiffness, his movements just a fraction too controlled. Sarah's hand moved to her blade. The Vaxel dropped his tray. Underneath it, secured to his body, were weapons. Not energy weapons that the sensors would catch. Monofilament blades, nearly invisible, passed through standard screening. He drew two and lunged toward the nearest faction leader. Sarah was already moving. She vaulted over a chair and intercepted him mid-stride. Her blade caught his wrist, redirecting his strike away from his target. Other servers throughout the room suddenly dropped their disguises. 12 assassins total, all armed with monofilament weapons, all converging on the conference table. The diplomatic guards were scrambling, reaching for their sidearms, confused by the close-quarters chaos. Sarah had no such hesitation. She moved through the attackers like wind through grass, her blades finding hands, wrists, elbows. She disarmed 3 assassins in the first 5 seconds. An attacker came at her from behind. Sarah sensed rather than saw him, dropping low and sweeping her blade backward. It caught his ankle and he tumbled forward over her. She was up instantly, her blade disarming him before he could recover. The conference hall had erupted into chaos. Delegates were diving for cover. Guards were trying to establish firing lines but couldn't shoot without hitting civilians. Sarah alone moved with certainty through the melee. Her training, honed through thousands of hours of practice, guided her movements without conscious thought. 2 assassins cornered one of the Kryn faction leaders. Sarah interposed herself between them and their target. They attacked simultaneously from different angles. Sarah's blades wove a defensive pattern, redirecting both strikes, then countering with precise attacks to their weapon hands. Both monofilament blades fell harmlessly to the floor. More assassins pressed the attack. Sarah fought with surgical precision, every movement economical, every strike targeted. She hit pressure points, joints, nerve clusters. Not one killing blow, but each attacker went down disabled and disarmed. The last assassin realized he was alone, his 11 companions all on the floor. He backed toward an exit. Sarah pursued calmly, her blades ready. He threw his weapon at her in desperation. She simply stepped aside, letting it pass, then closed the distance and struck his wrist. He collapsed, clutching his disabled hand. Silence fell over the conference hall. 12 assassins lay disarmed on the floor, all alive but incapacitated. 3 ambassadors and 2 council members stood unharmed, staring at Sarah in shock. The entire engagement had lasted 94 seconds. Station security arrived moments later to find the situation already resolved. The diplomatic guards stood frozen, having barely had time to draw their weapons. Sarah calmly sheathed her blades and reported the situation to her commanding officer. The footage of the incident spread across every military network in the coalition within hours. Analysts watched in amazement as Sarah moved through 12 armed attackers without pause, disabling each with precision and control. Command officers studied the recordings, noting how conventional security measures had failed while one officer with blades had succeeded. Sarah Hayes had proven something they could no longer ignore. Sometimes the old ways were not just effective. Sometimes they were superior. The footage played on repeat in the Coalition Defense Command's secure briefing room. 20 high-ranking officers from various species watched as Sarah moved through the 12 assassins with devastating efficiency. The playback was slowed to quarter speed, allowing them to study each movement in detail. Admiral Kresh, a Kryn with more scars than scales, paused the video at a critical moment. "Watch here. Our security sensors tracked the assassin's weapon trajectory, predicted blocking angles, suggested optimal defensive positions for our guards." He advanced the footage frame by frame. Lieutenant Hayes ignored all of it. She moved where no algorithm predicted. The assassin's strike went exactly where our system said it would go. Hayes was simply not there. A Vaxel tactical analyst brought up additional data. "I have reviewed combat recordings from 200 engagement scenarios over the past 5 years. In every conventional fight, our predictive systems achieve 78% accuracy in forecasting combatant movements. Against Lieutenant Hayes's blade techniques, the accuracy drops to 9%. The systems cannot model her combat style. That is because her style is ancient," argued General Toth, a Thrawn commander. Developed before sensor technology, before predictive algorithms. It evolved to fight other unpredictable biological opponents, not to interface with our modern combat networks. Another officer pulled up comparative analysis. Here is the concerning part. We tested these blade techniques against our standard security protocols. Energy shields, sensor nets, automated defense turrets. The shields are useless because blades pass through them with no energy signature. The sensors cannot predict blade trajectories because they move with human muscle, not mechanical servos. The turrets cannot target effectively at close range. Admiral Kresh leaned back in his chair. In other words, we have built our entire security infrastructure around energy weapons and technological solutions. These methods bypass all of it. It gets worse, the Vaxel analyst continued. She brought up new footage showing training sessions at various coalition facilities. In the 3 weeks since the Telos 9 incident, 17 different military installations have begun training programs in blade combat. Mostly human personnel, but some other species as well. The techniques are spreading. The room fell silent as they watched clips of Marines, security officers, and Special Forces operatives practicing with blades. The movements were crude compared to Sarah's fluid mastery, but the basics were there. Strike the weapon hand. Use footwork to control angles. Target joints and pressure points. How many personnel are training in these methods? Kresh asked. Current estimates suggest over 2,000 across 12 star systems. And growing daily. Every human who sees the Telos 9 footage wants to learn. Some are requisitioning blades through official channels. Others are making their own. A human general named Ruth spoke up. With respect, I do not see the problem. We are developing new combat capabilities. Capabilities that clearly work. The Telos 9 incident proved that. The problem, Kresh said heavily, is control. Or rather, the lack of it. Energy weapons have power sources we can monitor, safeties we can engage remotely, discharge signatures we can track. A blade is just metal. We cannot shut it down. We cannot track its use. We cannot prevent someone from carrying one concealed. The Vaxel analyst displayed new information. We consulted with civilian security experts. They ran threat assessments based on widespread blade combat training. The results are disturbing. A skilled blade fighter can bypass 73% of standard security measures. Assassination risk increases by a factor of 8. Station security protocols that we thought were comprehensive become nearly useless. Another officer pulled up statistics. Look at historical data from Earth before they joined the coalition. In regions where blade combat was common, assassination rates were significantly higher than in regions that relied on firearms or other detectable weapons. A skilled knife fighter could eliminate targets in crowded spaces with minimal detection risk. General Ruth frowned. You are talking about assassinations. Lieutenant Hayes saved lives. She stopped assassins. Today, yes, Kresh acknowledged. But what about tomorrow? What happens when these skills spread further? What happens when criminal organizations train their members? When terrorists adopt these methods? When political extremists decide that ancient blade work is the perfect tool for their goals? The room absorbed this in uncomfortable silence. The footage continued playing in the background, showing Sarah disarming attacker after attacker with surgical precision. What had seemed heroic now appeared threatening. A civilian council representative entered the briefing. Chancellor Vix, a Vaxel diplomat with considerable influence, studied the footage with calculating eyes. The Galactic Council is aware of this situation. We have received concerns from multiple member systems. The public sees Lieutenant Hayes as a hero, and rightfully so. But government security services see a dangerous precedent. What is the Council's position? Asked Ruth. Fear, Vix said bluntly. Not of Lieutenant Hayes herself, but of what she represents. For 500 years, we have relied on technology to maintain security and order. Weapons that can be detected, tracked, and controlled. Combat styles that our systems can predict and counter. Lieutenant Hayes has demonstrated that all of our security infrastructure has a critical blind spot. And now that blind spot is common knowledge. Kresh pulled up a galaxy map highlighting 12 core systems in red. These systems have already recorded security incidents involving blade weapons in the past 2 weeks. Small incidents mostly, but the pattern is clear. 3 attempted robberies using knives instead of energy weapons. 2 assaults. 1 attempted murder. All by individuals who claimed inspiration from the Telos 9 footage. You cannot blame Lieutenant Hayes for criminal behavior, Ruth protested. No one is blaming her, Vix replied. We are acknowledging reality. She revealed a vulnerability in our security systems. Others are now exploiting that vulnerability. The question is what we do about it. The Vaxel analyst displayed projections. If current trends continue, we estimate 20,000 personnel will have basic blade combat training within 6 months. 50,000 within a year. The techniques will spread to civilian populations. Security costs will increase by 30% just to compensate for this new threat vector. We could mandate counter-training, suggested a Thrawn general. Teach our security forces how to defend against blade attacks. We tried, the analyst replied. Preliminary results show that counter-training requires nearly as much time as learning blade combat itself. And even then, advantage remains with the blade fighter in close quarters. The only reliable defense is maintaining distance, which is not always possible in ships, stations, or urban environments. Chancellor Vix folded his hands. The Council is considering options. One proposal is to ban military training in blade combat techniques. Classify the knowledge as restricted. Make it illegal to teach or practice these methods in official capacity. That is an extreme measure, Ruth objected. These techniques saved lives at Telos 9. And might cost many more lives in the future, Kresh countered. I do not like it either, General. But Vix is right. We cannot put this knowledge back in the box, but we can limit its official spread. Make it clear that while Lieutenant Hayes acted heroically, her methods are too dangerous for widespread adoption. The debate continued for hours. Some officers argued for unrestricted training, believing the defensive benefits outweighed the risks. Others insisted that the assassination potential alone justified a ban. Civilian representatives worried about public perception versus actual security needs. Finally, Chancellor Vix called for a vote among the 12 core systems security councils. The measure was simple. Should blade combat techniques be prohibited in military and security services across coalition space? The vote took place over the following week. Security councils reviewed the evidence, consulted with their governments, and assessed the risks. Public opinion remained largely supportive of Sarah and her methods, but government officials saw the larger implications. One by one the votes came in. Kresh watched the tally with grim resignation. 8 systems voted for the ban in the first 3 days. By the end of the week, all 12 core systems had voted in favor. Blade combat techniques were officially prohibited. Personnel already trained would be decertified. Teaching these methods in official capacity would result in discharge and possible criminal charges. The knowledge itself was not illegal, but its practice in military or security roles was now forbidden. Admiral Kresh had the unpleasant task of informing Lieutenant Sarah Hayes personally. He traveled to her current posting, a frontier security station, and met with her in a private office. Lieutenant, I want you to know that this decision was not made lightly. Your actions at Telos 9 saved lives. Your service record is exemplary. But the Council has determined that your combat methods pose too great a risk if widely adopted. Sarah listened without expression as he explained the ban, the decertification, the restrictions. When he finished, she simply nodded. I understand, sir. The techniques are effective. Perhaps too effective. Someone was going to reach this conclusion eventually. You are not angry? Kresh asked, surprised. Angry? No, sir. I am a soldier. I follow orders. If the coalition believes this is necessary for security, then I accept it. She paused. But sir, with respect, you cannot ban knowledge. You can prohibit training, decertify personnel, make rules. But the footage exists. People have seen what is possible. That will not go away. Kresh nodded slowly. I know. That is what frightens them most. The official ceremony was brief and formal. Sarah Hayes stood at attention in her dress uniform as Admiral Kresh read the decertification order. Her combat instructor credentials were revoked. Her authorization to teach blade techniques in any official capacity was terminated. Her active military service was concluded with full honors and a commendation for her heroic actions at Telos 9. Lieutenant Hayes, the coalition recognizes your exemplary service and your courage under fire. Your record will reflect your honorable retirement. You leave with our gratitude and respect, Kresh concluded. Sarah saluted one final time. Thank you, sir. It has been my honor to serve. She left the ceremony without fanfare, carrying a small box containing her service medals and official documents. 23 other military personnel across the 12 core systems received similar decertifications that same day. All were skilled in blade combat. All had trained others. All were now prohibited from continuing. The media coverage was intense but brief. Some outlets praised the ban as necessary for security. Others criticized it as government overreach. Sarah declined all interview requests. Within a month, the story faded from public attention, replaced by newer scandals and crises. Sarah returned to Earth and settled in a quiet city far from the major spaceports. She rented a small office in an unremarkable building and registered a business license. The sign on her door read simply, "Hey Security Consulting." The first few months were slow. She took contracts for security assessments, helping small businesses review their procedures. The work was mundane but steady. She evaluated camera placements, tested access controls, recommended improvements to guard rotations. Nothing that required her particular skills. Then a wealthy Vaxel merchant contacted her. His name was Kelvin and he had seen the Telos 9 footage. "I need a personal protection specialist," he explained. "Someone who can keep me safe in environments where technology fails or is compromised. Someone whose methods cannot be countered by standard tactics. I am willing to pay very well." Sarah considered carefully. "I am no longer certified for military or official security roles. My methods are banned in that context. But private security is different. I can work for private clients as long as I follow local laws." "Exactly," Kelvin agreed. "I am not asking you to train military forces or work for governments. I need personal protection. That is legal." Sarah took the contract. She began training a small team of bodyguards, all carefully selected civilians with no military affiliation. She taught them the basics: footwork, targeting vulnerabilities, economy of motion. Not the advanced techniques she had mastered, but enough to be effective. Word spread quietly through certain circles. A human corporation executive hired her to train his security detail. A Thrawn diplomat requested personal protection during negotiations in dangerous territory. A Kryn shipping magnate wanted someone to assess vulnerabilities in his station security. Sarah's business grew, but she maintained strict boundaries. She never trained military personnel. She never worked for governments. She avoided any publicity. Her clients appreciated her discretion and her effectiveness. 5 years after her retirement, Sarah employed 12 full-time security specialists. They protected clients across 6-star systems, all using variations of the techniques she had developed. They were not soldiers. They were private security professionals operating entirely within legal frameworks. The coalition watched but could do nothing. Private security was not military service. Teaching civilians was not the same as training soldiers. Sarah had found the exact boundary between permitted and prohibited, and she operated carefully within it. Meanwhile, the ban itself had unintended consequences. Military personnel whispered about the forbidden techniques with fascination. Young recruits heard stories about the legendary Lieutenant Hayes who had been too dangerous to remain in service. The Telos 9 footage, despite attempts to restrict it, circulated through unofficial channels. Some personnel ignored the ban and trained secretly. Others left military service specifically to learn from private instructors who claimed to teach similar methods. The ban had made blade combat techniques mysterious and desirable rather than eliminating them. 10 years after the ban, Sarah sat in her office reviewing a protection contract when she received an unexpected visitor. Instructor Thal 9, now retired from the Galactic Combat Academy, appeared at her door. "Instructor Thal 9, Sarah said with genuine pleasure. "It has been many years. Please sit." The elderly Vaxel settled into a chair with careful movements. "I am no longer an instructor, just as you are no longer a lieutenant. We are both civilians now, free to speak openly." "What brings you here?" Sarah asked. "Curiosity primarily. I wanted to see what became of my most unusual student." Thal 9 looked around the modest office. "You could have become wealthy if you had wanted. Capitalized on your fame. Written books. Sold training programs. That would have drawn attention," Sarah replied. "Made me a target for those who opposed what I represented. This way is quieter. Safer. And yet you still teach. Still spread the techniques." "I teach private citizens to protect themselves and others. Nothing illegal about that." Thal 9 made a sound like crystalline laughter. "Technically correct. The best kind of correct, as humans say." He grew serious. "I came to tell you something. At the academy we still talk about you. The instructors, I mean. When cadets struggle with standard methods, we remember the small human who succeeded with unconventional ones." "Do you tell them what happened?" Sarah asked. "We tell them the truth. That you were so effective your methods frightened the very people you protected. That sometimes being exceptional is dangerous, not because you intend harm, but because others fear what they cannot control. Sarah nodded slowly. That is a harsh lesson for young cadets. Perhaps. But it is an important one. Combat is not just about technique. It is about politics, perception, and power. You taught us that even if you did not mean to. They talked for another hour, sharing memories of the academy, discussing changes in military doctrine, carefully avoiding any technical discussion of blade techniques. When Thal9 finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. The ban will not last forever, you know. Governments change. Policies shift. Someone will eventually realize that prohibiting effective techniques does not make anyone safer. Maybe, Sarah agreed. But by then it will not matter. The knowledge exists. People who want to learn will find ways to learn. The ban only affects official channels. After Thal9 left, Sarah returned to her work. She had 3 new contract proposals to review and a training session scheduled for tomorrow. Her life was quiet, productive, and far from the spotlight that had once threatened to consume her. Across the galaxy, in military academies and training facilities, instructors still told stories about Cadet Sarah Hayes, the fragile human who had arrived at Helios 7 Academy and changed everything. The warrior whose techniques were so effective they had to be banned. Some stories exaggerated her abilities, claiming she could defeat dozens of opponents simultaneously or move faster than the eye could see. Others focused on the injustice of the ban, making her a martyr figure. A few got the details right, telling the simple truth about skill, dedication, and the consequences of excellence. At the Galactic Combat Academy, new cadets still struggled with standard training, just as Sarah once had. Occasionally, one would ask about alternative methods, having heard whispered stories about the legendary human and her blades. The instructors would smile and say the same thing every time: those techniques are banned in military service. We cannot teach them here. But if you want to learn about combat effectiveness, study the recordings that are publicly available. Study how Lieutenant Hayes moved, how she thought, how she solved problems that others said were impossible. Study her, and maybe you will find your own path. In a quiet office on Earth, Sarah Hayes worked late into the evening. She had no regrets about her choices, no bitterness about the ban. She had proven what she needed to prove. The rest was just details. Her blades hung on the wall behind her desk, cleaned and maintained as always, ready if needed but rarely used now. They were reminders of a different life, a different time. But the principles they represented, the lessons they taught, those remained as sharp as ever. Outside her window, the city lights sparkled against the darkness. Somewhere out there, people were training, learning, discovering what their bodies could do when properly guided. The knowledge spread slowly, quietly, through networks the ban could never touch. Sarah smiled slightly and returned to her work. The galaxy had tried to forget what she had shown them. They had banned the techniques, decertified the practitioners, buried the evidence as best they could. But you cannot ban an idea whose time has come. You cannot prohibit knowledge that has already been shared. You can only delay the inevitable. Sarah Hayes had shown them what was possible. What they did with that knowledge was up to them.